Hi, Craig. I'm Heather Walter-McCabe. I'm an associate professor at Wayne State University with a joint appointment in social work and law. And I started in micro practice and now have fallen in love primarily with macro practice in general, but primarily with policy. Most of my work is in healthcare, access to health equity, with a real specific emphasis on LGBTQ communities. That's all right. I'm so sorry to hear that, but please feel free to chime in because I think as of now, it's just the three of us. So I
Yes.
welcome any questions, comments, thoughts you have as we're talking. So please don't hesitate to put those in the chat because this is your time and I want to make sure we get you what would be important to you. Okay, do you mind telling me where you're from or what brought you here today? Does it give the three dots when people are typing?
No, unfortunately. I'm like, that would have been so perfect, as you're awaiting your response to just be like, put
That's
something.
okay.
But while he's doing, oh wait, here we go. MSW.
Oh, fantastic. Welcome. That's great. Well, hopefully you are probably in the middle of a lot of work, but are having some fun learning about some new things. And so I think maybe there are some questions for me, or we can do this rather informally. Do you want to kind of lead me down where you'd like for me to go? And then if there's anything, Craig, that you want to specifically discuss, this is your time. What happens at the end of the day when you're the only person here, you can, with the moderator, you are welcome to ask anything that you'd like to hear about. So
Absolutely. And I can kick us off with one question. And this one is, what do you think are some major changes to the social work field and advocacy work compared to when you first started your career? I know.
right? I don't know if I can remember that long ago. I think that recently, and I do think this is recent, when I went into it, I think a lot of people, and then this is still true for some, oh, great, interested in political social work, perfect. I think when I went into it, there were a lot of people there who were there to become counselors, right? To be private practice and I think that has been a trend for quite some time.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I'm seeing now, and I think it started. Oh, great. Online student. Yep. I actually teach in an online program a lot. So, and I live in Indiana as well, Craig. I'm sitting here in Noblesville, Indiana today. So, hello. But I have found that there's this renewed energy for figuring out what is going on with systems and what is going on in politics. Now, it's interesting because I think that I would say to some systems and some in what's going on in politics, but it does seem like when I first started, and I always have taught macro or policy, I was dragging students kicking and screaming through my classes, and I'd always ask, just be honest, who wants to be here? Or who's thinking, oh, I'm taking this because they are making me take a macro class. And I would say in the beginning, more than 9 out of 10 would say they're making me take this. But usually on the good news, by the end of the class, there were actually some students who were thinking about changing to the macro track because they'd see what all's involved, right? But now I would say it's more like only about 7 of them will say that. Now, part of that is I'm in Detroit, not in Indianapolis. Part of that, though, I do think is this political climate that we're currently in. And I don't think it's new, but I think renewed attention has been put on how these systems so often only work for some of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Again, I would say to many of us, welcome to the party, right? Like this isn't new,
Mm-hmm.
but okay, so you are actually in education and switching to social work. So you have seen some things, huh?
Yeah, that is very interesting.
I have had at least in the last 2 years, 3 educators going through the MSW program.
Really?
And yes, I think that we are seeing some, and Craig could speak to this better, some movement from the education system as we're seeing, again, systems not
Okay.
serving people as well.
Yeah.
And I think that for some folks who are frustrated with the systems of education, social work is an opportunity to go into the system in a different way or to work on the systems themselves. Excuse me,
Right.
Craig, I did tell her I have 3 small dogs who are apparently deciding now might be a time to talk to me. You have a doctorate in education. All right. So you can speak theory as well as practice, it sounds like. That's great.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I guess those are the biggest changes I would see.
Mm-hmm.
Still trying to figure out how to, in some respects, for students who haven't seen that shift and who don't think in systems and don't see how systems impact different communities differently.
Yeah.
It's been an interesting time to try to have those discussions in a politicized environment.
Mm-hmm.
So much research to suggest that the politics of it may be one thing, but if you look at the research
Mm-hmm.
here, in terms of systems do impact different communities differently, and in some ways are set up to.
Yeah. And
Many ways are set up.
no, that's such a great point. And it makes me think about, like, for me personally, I graduated with my MSW in 2021. I didn't know I hadn't even heard the term of macro social work until I want to say this was 2019 of my BSW program, And so even before I knew that it was a term, like I already was thinking very big picture or looking at systems, And so it's interesting that you mentioned that. And I really do believe, that, like you said, it's not anything new per se, but more so maybe the exposure to everything that's happening around us, even before the pandemic,
Oh yeah.
you know.
Well, and I think that if we don't talk about those things, I mean, that's one thing. I mean, Craig, I'll say this, and you can comment back to me if you think that perhaps I am. Oh, but do we have another person
Yes,
here too?
Kara, or I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong, but looks like Kara Scott.
Great. Hi, Kara. Welcome. Well, and I'm going to get a blanket for my dog so they'll stop cranking.
Okay, awesome.
So I would say that I think, I was teaching in Indiana. And for those of you who can see me, I'm sure it's going to be shocking that I am a white identified woman in Indiana from rural setting who grew up in that setting. And many, not all, certainly, of my students were suburban, white women, some straight, some LGBTQ, some certainly Black, some Latina, some like we had a mix, but Indiana just our demographics as such, we kind of matched our demographics, right? And so talking about hi Kira. So talking about some of these issues, there's been a lot of time thinking about how do we talk about some of these issues. And I think that you're right in terms of, and I'm going to talk about some police and personal violence stuff for those who would prefer not to talk about that. But, Trayvon Martin. And then I hesitate to list names because there's so many to list, but starting to talk about those in class, it seemed like around that time is when I started seeing students go, now, wait a minute, maybe, just maybe there's something else going on here, not just that if people would pull themselves up by their bootstraps, maybe we need to look at the systems themselves. And so that for me has been a really, exciting is the wrong word because of the circumstances. It is exciting to see people wanting to make those changes in ways that I haven't seen in the past. And helping students get from, wait, I'm interested in that, but I want to be a counselor. So what does this have to do with me? To, okay, even as a social worker in many other areas, here are some things I can do, even if it doesn't feel like enough sometimes. So that's kind of where my work has kind of focused, and what I do a lot in the classroom. And then I do in I do advocacy in my personal life, but more as like a personal, like a lot of the LGBTQ stuff that's going on right now. I do a lot of advocacy around. But I'll stop talking for a minute. Kara, do you feel comfortable introducing yourself and telling us a little, because it's just the four of us. Craig is having issues with the audio, so he's typing, and you could read a little bit about his background. And I say his, I was using they. I apologize, Craig. I don't know your pronouns. But Kara, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, that would be great. Thanks, Craig.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can.
Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry, I'm sorry for joining late as well. I just came from an internship meeting that ran very long, and that was on Zoom, and I feel like my computer is working very hard right now, and it's making a lot of noise, so hopefully you can't hear that. Anyway, I'm Kara. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I did read some of Craig's background here, and Craig, I am also from Indiana, and I actually live in Cherville.
How are we all three? Are you sitting in Indiana too?
I am.
Wow, this is
okay.
insane.
The DC conference, all three of us. I'm in Noblesville right now.
Oh, wow. What are the odds?
Right? I mean, that's statistically, I would be interested in seeing that. I apologize for the barky dog. Keep going.
Okay. Yeah, I live in Indiana. I was born and raised here in Northwest Indiana. I went to Lake Central. But I actually go to Loyola in Chicago. I'm an MSW student, and I'm actually a dual degree student. I'm also getting an MJ, a master's in jurisprudence, which is kind of a lot of where like my advocacy interests and stuff come in there. But I was listening to you speak about having students in a social work program who don't understand. They're kind of like, why do I have to take this class? I was always kind of the opposite. I got my bachelor's in social work as well, and now I'm in an MSW program, so I've got experience with the coursework in social work programs, and I've always felt, for me, a lot of them have been very micro-focused. I'm in a micro tract as well because of my dual degree, and my current internship is it's clinical. I'm in a private practice mental health clinic. I also do some school-based stuff that we're partnered with there, which I think I'm enjoying even more than the clinical-based stuff. But I've always been kind of the opposite, where I'm like, I love the macro level stuff, and I feel like everything is so focused on all of these theories and micro level things. I also was in my junior year of my bachelor's degree in 2020 when everything changed, and there were a lot of things, macro and micro level, that I feel like just because of the circumstances at the time were wonky because of all my professors doing their best to shift us over to virtual learning at the last second. But regardless of all that, I do feel like a lot of my social work experience has been very micro focused, and I've always wanted more of the macro stuff, which is what led me to a dual degree program, getting an MJ as well when I was looking at grad school. So,
well, and I don't know if you heard me say that I have told many of my students now, once I was out in the world and doing more micro focus stuff, I always knew at some point I wanted to do maybe something with some macro, but I didn't quite get it. Yeah. But once I was out in the world, I was like, I have to do something about these policies that are not impacting the clients that I'm working with. some would say they're, as I said earlier, some would say that they aren't doing what they're supposed to do. Others might say that they're doing it exactly as they were intended to do it, right? But so I went back to law school, and I've said I maybe could have saved myself $70,000 if I had practiced more macro. But I do think, like when I hear you say you're doing the MJ, I mean, I think that you'll find that there are things that you'll learn that'll go beyond what you would have been able to get just because of time with all the things that we have to teach. And so I think it's good. And, I think it is unfortunate and in some ways just plain wrong that I find that I get invited to do things or doors open to me because I have a JD, but I'm asked to stay because they recognize the value of social work. Whereas if they would just recognize the value of social work and invite more social workers to the table, but that's where getting that door open, you actually can then, you can invite more social workers in. And I find I spend a lot of my time in meetings where I'm there because of my law degree saying things like, have we asked anyone on the ground who's impacted by this, what they think about these changes, or if they even want them? Have we started with where the community is in terms of like, maybe we think they need a new rec center and what they really want is a basketball court with, that's a really silly, but sometimes it can be even more often that. And so I think that's where we can bring our social work perspective into policymaking rooms, where often the tables are set, the agenda's set, a lot of work is done. We kind of decide what we're going to do. And then we go, oh, wait a minute. We need to have community involvement. Let's ask them what they think of this. And then we present it to them and say, what do you think? And then if we need to, we'll make a few tweaks and move on, rather than inviting people to the table at the beginning and having them not only at the table, but helping to set the agenda for the work we're going to do, and their voice being included the whole way through the process, so that it's not just put the rubber stamp on what we just did. And while I don't feel it's always successful, because this is its own system of trying to get people to change, the more you make that part of your work and you bring it up, the more people can hear it. And hopefully over time, it's going to become something that becomes more normal and more standard of practice, what people do. And I think also when you're the one that's running the project, you can model that, right? And so that's the other piece of it. I don't know if that was helpful or not, but that's the kind of thing that I think has been ways that I think social work can really uniquely influence. And if we're practicing with clients rather than in a specifically policy setting, we were talking about this earlier, so stop if you were all here for this, but I think as we're seeing trends with people that we're working with, having particular issues with systems, we can write letters. We can write op-eds through a professional lens. We can talk to our clients, and if they're interested in participating in the system, and many times they are, if they understand that it's an opportunity, they may not even realize they have the opportunity to do that. We can ensure they know how to make a call to their legislator. We can ensure that they have the opportunity to write a letter if that's something they want to do and share their story. Stories are powerful. That kind of thing can bridge the micro macro. I hate calling it a divide, but sometimes it is, right? Like it can really help us use all of our social work skills no matter where we are practicing along the continuum of social work. What other questions do you have? Yeah.
Oh, Craig has a question, which is pretty close to what I was wondering about as well.
Okay, great. No, I think finding faculty who are macro focused and trying to take their class no matter what it is, because the reality is if I teach something that's not very macro focused, I'm going to be talking about systems all day long, right? And I know that may seem like a silly one, but once you find macro focused faculty, sometimes they're teaching all macro, but a lot of times they are teaching some macro and then some other stuff. Take their stuff. If you can get involved in community efforts while you're in school, which I know is a heavy lift if you're working and doing your master's program, that can give you exposure to it. You can really work to ensure that your field office works with you to get a macro internship. And I know in some places there's some worry about licensing with that. But I think advocating for yourself to the extent that you can and just saying this is something that is going to impact my work, even if it means finding a place that will get you what you need and seeing if there's a way that the school can work with you to set up an internship there for your hours. Going to the Hill, if you are able to while you're in school, go to the Hill. Let's see. Oh, you two have the different that both have SU, right? But going to the Hill, one thing that's happening in Michigan right now is after the latest shooting at MSU, sad that we have to use the latest in front of shooting, but they are they just put forth a set of gun laws, and I've encouraged all my students to follow that, no matter how they feel about gun laws. It's like they just got introduced. I want you to follow them through the process, because that's a way to see how the process works, right? So anything, unfortunately, a lot of that kind of thing is done on your own rather than it being part of it. If you have a macro social work student network group at your school, definitely get linked in with them. They can be really great. And if you don't have one at your school and want to start one, talk with your school. And know it's on the ACOSA, ACOSA website, how to get
literally was just typing it in my phone.
Awesome.
I couldn't remember
it's a great way to get involved with a national network of students who are doing this. They actually, I was the faculty advisor to a group of students who wanted to start one at Indiana University when I was there. So, those are some ways. And sometimes, unfortunately, it does mean, I'm not hurting you. I swear, I just picked him up. He thinks he's done. I think that just, unfortunately, it does mean kind of going outside your classes. But what also happens with that is you make personal connections and networking that may be really useful to you post-graduation in terms of getting a job. Oh, you were at IU. Great. Bloomington or Indy?
Bloomington.
It's where I got my undergrad too. Good stuff. Loved it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, did that answer your question though, Craig? Great. And thanks for putting the ACOSA link in there. Yeah, they have, if you, if there are opportunities for student funding for conference, which I know is very limited, but if they do exist at your university, I know a lot of the university folks really go to SWR, the Society for Social Work Research Conference, but I really like to go to the CSWE annual program meeting, because that's where a lot of macro folks show up. Mimi Abramowitz, Mimi, and Professor Dr. Abramowitz. I don't know. Somebody just mentioned her. I think Craig may have. Oh, it was in the last session. Anyway, she's there. Dr. Terry Mizrahi, Mark Holman. I've met John Tropman there. Jack Rothman's been there and actually been able to talk with him. I mean, it's just like a really amazing community of macro folks. And so if you could get student funding to go to one of those.
What was it again? Sorry.
It's CSWE, that's Council on Social Work Education. Mm-hmm. It's in the fall each year, usually late October, early November. This year might be in Atlanta. No, I think it's in DC this year. I think it's in DC this year. But it's an annual meeting where they often talk about the state of social work education. Mm-hmm. But the macro macro folks, some of them do go to SWIR, but most of them go to CSWE, and they have the council, the special commission on macro social work meets there, other folks. So if you're interested in that, and again, I know you're students, so it may not be feasible, but if your school does have, yep, that's the one, APM, you got it. If your school has funding for students to go, that is a good one to do to meet others who are doing macro social work. And you go to the macro events and you speak up. You got to be careful though, they'll put you to work. It's macro folk. But they really will include you as a student. And so it's a really great opportunity if you're able to do that.
I love that. And as a person, so as a student, I remember like the push, right, to join NASW or other, professional organizations. And for some reason, I always was like, but that's, it's me. That's my personal, opinion.
Well, I will say, as professional organizations go, as macro people, how are we pushing our professional organizations to ensure that they are fighting for the things that they need to be fighting for?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, I think that we have limited dollars to spend. We spend our money where we think it's important. And speak up. I mean, that's one thing I liked about the macro groups at CSWE is they formed a special commission and they got new macro things in the educational, the EPOS, the things that all schools have to teach by grit and not giving up and advocating so that schools, in order to be to get their certifications, have to teach some of these macro concepts. And that's the kind of thing that we can do one small piece at a time, but move that ball even for social work. But yeah, advocating to our professional societies for movement on issues and their movement on issues, I think is extremely important. And I've written and made some phone calls to that effect, and I encourage you, even as students, to do the same if it's an area that's important. Okay, Barky Pants.
So, how are y'all feeling? I know we have a few more minutes left, but for Craig and Kara, like, any last questions that you want to ask? And Professor, can you insert your information in the chat if possible? Can we all follow up with you? Just if anything comes to mind.
Thank you for that. That'd be helpful for me. I guess, first of all, because I came in late, can you share just with me, I'm sure Craig has already heard this, but can you just share like what your current role is? I feel like I probably missed that in the introduction section of this.
Absolutely. And you're going to walk with me to put my dogs out. This is the most they've done in a while. I am so sorry. This does not usually happen. And of course, it's when I'm doing a talk. I am an associate professor at Wayne State University in Detroit with a joint appointment in social work and law. And I do my work primarily in health equity and access to health policy, with an emphasis on LGBTQ communities, but all communities that are disparately impacted generally. But again, primarily LGBTQ communities. But I teach, for example, the foundation level macro course for MSW students, and I teach the advanced practice class. I also, weirdly, I teach at the DRPH program at a school of public health. I teach global public health law and ethics. And I teach at the law school, I teach pandemic law, public health law, and sex, sexuality in the law. So, and I do a lot of administrative law in my work as well, which is like the regulations and the agencies in the executive branch. So I don't, did that give you the information you were asking about?
Yeah. Thank you. That all
Absolutely.
sounds
Well,
so cool.
well, if you're doing the MJ, I mean, I think a lot of the stuff that you're doing is probably the kind of, I actually am the faculty director of our MSL program, which is our version of a MJ. So yeah.
Cool. I guess my follow-up question for that. So I'm fingers crossed graduating in May,
Oh, yes.
hopefully. So I guess for me, I'm in a position now where I'm like starting to look at the career field and figuring out like what do I want to do now, because social work has so many possibilities. So what advice do you have, I guess, for someone who's looking for a career that will kind of balance the micro and the macro and the social work and the law and that kind of stuff?
So networking, which may sound overly simplified, but you are not going to go to a website and go, oh, there's my job. Well, I mean, maybe that'd be awesome, but it's less likely for you. So what I would recommend is that you are getting to know every single person that you can get to know. It's another reason to think about going to someplace like CSWE, talking to the faculty members at both your law school and your social work school, all of that, so that you can see, do they have friends? Seeing if they need a research assistant. Now you're doing May, but if you're looking for a job post-graduation, sometimes law schools have that for post-grads, although usually not. See how you can get plugged in and meet people. If there are agencies where you are trying to go in and volunteer on the weekend in all your spare time, I know you don't have any, but that kind of thing. Making phone calls, calling people like me and saying, this is the city. Do you know anybody there that would be, that I could talk to? Do those informational interviews, because these are harder niches to fit, but they're out there. And it may mean you get a job in social work that isn't squarely in your wheelhouse initially, while you're making all of those connections. If I'm going to be honest, which I hate that. I wish that weren't the case, but I think sometimes it's how we get moving in the direction that we need to for our job. Of course, this is coming from someone who hasn't known what I wanted to do when I grew up. I was almost 30 when I went back to law school. Then I ran a public health research project. Then I directed the Center for Law and Health. And then I became a faculty member. I think I was in my I must have been late 30s. So, knowing that even if the first job you find, you're trying to figure that out as you make contacts, it's okay for that not to be that perfect fit that first time, especially when it's a field where it sometimes takes a little bit longer. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Yeah, that's very helpful and reassuring. Thank you.
Yeah, and if you don't find it right away, those kinds of things do sometimes take longer to develop it, because a lot of it is about relationship building over time, especially in policy.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Any other questions for me? I know that time is late on a Thursday night. Well, I want to thank all of you for taking the time to come, especially like how funny that us are sitting in Indiana. Careful, those of you who are up in the north. It sounds like you're getting a bit of winter weather up there. I think we've got nothing coming down here, but y'all are, I think, getting about 6 inches, maybe. So, at any rate, and right, exactly, Craig. And then thank you so much for being willing to moderate this panel. It's been a delight.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for keeping the conversation going. We did it.
All right.
Yeah. So I think I have to leave for an event tonight, but I believe there's like a closing keynote, etc. But thank you all so much for joining, and best of wishes on your path.
Yes, and please do feel free to reach out if there's any way I can support you.